When you think about Stewie Griffin, that football-headed baby genius from Quahog, Rhode Island, you might remember his sophisticated British accent, his obsession with world domination, or his complicated relationship with his teddy bear Rupert. But beneath that infant exterior lies one of the most diabolical minds in animated television history. This is a journey through the darkest moments of Stewie's existence, where that one-year-old proved time and time again that age is just a number when it comes to pure, calculated evil. Let's start at the very beginning with one of Stewie's most fundamental and recurring evil traits. From the moment he could form coherent thoughts, Stewie Griffin had one overwhelming obsession that defined his early character. He wanted to kill his mother, Lois. Not in some cartoonish, harmless way. No, Stewie spent countless hours plotting elaborate schemes to commit matricide. And he wasn't shy about his intentions either. He would openly discuss his plans, draw detailed diagrams, and construct complex devices all designed with one purpose in mind. The fascinating thing about Stewie's desire to eliminate Lois wasn't just the intent itself, but the sheer creativity and intelligence he brought to each attempt. This wasn't a baby throwing tantrums. This was a criminal mastermind who happened to be in diapers. He built time machines, weather control devices, mind control helmets, and weapons that would make military contractors jealous. All of this brainpower, all of this ingenuity, focused on the destruction of the woman who gave him life. What makes it even more disturbing is how casual Stewie could be about his matricidal intentions. He would discuss murdering Lois the same way other babies might talk about wanting a cookie. The matter-of-fact nature of his evil plans added an extra layer of darkness to his character. He wasn't driven by rage or temporary anger. This was cold, calculated, premeditated evil that lived in the mind of someone who still needed help getting dressed in the morning. Throughout the early seasons of the show, viewers witnessed Stewie create an arsenal that would rival small nations. He had laser guns, rocket launchers, mind control devices, weather machines, and even a sentient evil teddy bear at one point. Every piece of technology he created served his ultimate goals, whether that was world domination or the elimination of his mother. And he did all of this while maintaining the appearance of an innocent baby whenever it suited him. One of the most chilling aspects of Stewie's character was how he could switch between being absolutely diabolical and playing the role of a cute, innocent child. He understood manipulation at a fundamental level. When adults would look at him, they'd see a baby. They couldn't comprehend the evil genius that lurked behind those big eyes. This gave Stewie the perfect cover for his operations. He was essentially invisible, dismissed as harmless because of his age, while he plotted increasingly elaborate schemes. The relationship between Stewie and his mother Lois was complex and twisted. On some level, Stewie clearly had feelings for her. There were moments where he showed vulnerability, where he wanted her attention and approval. But these moments of weakness would often trigger something in him, as if showing love or need made him feel exposed and vulnerable. His response to these feelings was often to double down on his evil intentions, as if destroying Lois would somehow eliminate the confusing emotions she created in him. In the landmark 100th episode of Family Guy, something unprecedented happened. After years of threats, plots, and schemes, Stewie finally followed through. The episode was titled simply and directly, Stewie Kills Lois. This wasn't another failed attempt or comedic near miss. This was the moment when the baby's darkest fantasy became animated reality, even if the reality turned out to be more complicated than viewers initially believed. The setup for this ultimate act of evil began innocently enough. It was Lois's birthday, and the Griffin family gathered to celebrate. The gifts were mediocre and forgettable, typical for the Griffin household. Then, Brian, the family dog, and Stewie's sometimes partner in crime, sometimes moral compass, presented Lois with an expensive gift. 2 tickets for a luxury cruise. It was a generous, thoughtful present, the kind of thing that would make any recipient happy. Lois, naturally assuming that the second ticket was meant for Peter, her husband, immediately began making plans for a romantic getaway. She never considered that Brian might have intended to go with her, or that anyone else might want to join the trip. In her mind, this was clearly a gift for her and Peter to enjoy together. Brian tried to object, tried to explain his intentions, but it was too late. The assumption had been made, and Lois and Peter began preparing for their cruise. Stewie, watching all of this unfold, felt a rising sense of anger and betrayal. He had assumed, as children do, that he would be included in any family activity. The idea that his mother would go on a trip without him was unthinkable, but that's exactly what happened. Lois and Peter departed for their cruise, leaving Stewie behind in Quahog with the rest of the family. No explanation, no consideration, just abandonment in Stewie's mind. For most children, being left behind while parents take a vacation might cause some tears or sulking. For Stewie Griffin, it triggered something far darker. As soon as his parents were gone, Stewie began plotting his revenge. Brian, knowing Stewie well, tried to talk him down. Brian reminded Stewie of all the other times he had threatened to kill Lois, all the elaborate plans that had come to nothing. Brian was skeptical, even mocking, suggesting that Stewie would never actually follow through with his matricidal fantasies. This skepticism, this doubt from his closest companion, became the catalyst for what happened next. A Stewie, stung by Brian's lack of faith in his evil capabilities, decided that this time would be different. This time, he wouldn't just plan and scheme. This time, he would act. He would prove to Brian, to himself, to everyone, that when Stewie Griffin said he was going to do something evil, he meant it. Meanwhile, on the cruise ship, Peter was being his typical self, which is to say he was being absolutely mortifying. He wasn't content with just enjoying the luxury vacation. No, Peter had to make everything about himself and his particular brand of crude humor. He defecated on the poop deck, apparently finding the name of that section of the ship too hilarious to resist making a literal joke. He revealed to everyone at the captain's table that he and Lois had almost aborted Meg, their eldest daughter, sharing this deeply personal and hurtful information with complete strangers as if it was a funny anecdote. Lois, enduring embarrassment after embarrassment, finally reached her breaking point. She couldn't take Peter's behavior anymore. She needed space, needed to breathe, needed to be away from her husband's constant humiliation of her. So she went outside, alone, to look at the ocean and try to find some peace on what was supposed to be a relaxing vacation. She stood there, looking at the water, probably wondering how her life had led to this moment, when she heard something. A voice. A familiar voice, but one that shouldn't be there. She turned, and there he was. Stewie. Her infant son, somehow on the cruise ship, somehow having tracked her down in the middle of the ocean. The logistics of how a 1-year-old managed to get on a speedboat, navigate the open waters, and board a moving cruise ship were never fully explained, because they didn't matter. What mattered was that Stewie was there, and Lois knew immediately that something was very wrong. The look on Stewie's face was not that of a baby happy to see his mother. There was no relief, no joy, no innocent pleasure at a surprise reunion. Instead, there was something cold and determined in his eyes. Lois started to ask how he got there, what was happening, but her questions died in her throat when she saw what Stewie was pulling out from behind his back. A machine gun. A very real, very deadly machine gun, held in the tiny hands of her infant son. There was a moment. A single moment where everything hung in the balance. A moment where Lois might have said something, done something, where the situation might have been diffused. But that moment passed in an instant. Stewie, without hesitation, without any visible remorse or second guessing, opened fire. The sound of gunfire shattered the peaceful ocean night. Bullets tore through Lois's body as she stood there, unable to process what was happening, unable to believe that her own child was murdering her. Lois fell, her body, riddled with bullets, toppled over the railing of the cruise ship. She plunged into the dark ocean waters below, disappearing beneath the waves. Stewie watched her fall, watched her sink, and felt nothing but satisfaction. He had done it. After years of planning, years of threats and schemes, he had finally achieved his goal. Lois Griffin was dead, killed by her own son, her body lost to the depths of the ocean. Stewie returned to Quahog, taking care to cover his tracks and establish his alibi. Days passed. 6 days, to be exact. Lois was officially listed as missing. The cruise ship reported that she had disappeared during the voyage, presumably fallen overboard in some tragic accident. There was no body, no evidence of foul play, nothing to suggest anything other than a terrible mishap. The Griffin family, meanwhile, was devastated. Peter was distraught. Meg and Chris were mourning their mother. Brian was worried and confused. But Stewie was elated. He had pulled off the perfect crime. Not only had he succeeded in killing Lois, but he had done so in a way that left no evidence pointing back to him. No one suspected the baby. How could they? Babies don't commit murder. Babies don't use machine guns. Babies don't plot elaborate revenge schemes. The very absurdity of it provided Stewie with the perfect cover. As time went on, the family tried to move forward with their lives. A full year passed. Peter, after an appropriate mourning period, began dating other women. Chris, unable to cope with the reality of his mother's death, had been told and convinced himself that Lois was merely away at a health spa, a comforting delusion that allowed him to function. Meg, according to Stewie's casual observation, had really begun to blossom into a woman, though this was delivered with typical Griffin family tastelessness. Through it all, Stewie maintained his innocent facade. He played the role of the grieving baby perfectly when necessary, while privately celebrating his victory. He had gotten away with murder. The perfect crime had been committed, and the world continued to spin, completely unaware that a 1-year-old child had successfully carried out matricide. But the universe of Family Guy is rarely straightforward, and what seems like a conclusion is often just the beginning of something even more complicated. The case of Lois's disappearance couldn't stay cold forever. Someone had to be blamed. Someone had to pay for what happened to Lois Griffin. And who was the most obvious suspect? Not the baby with the arsenal of weapons and documented history of threatening to kill his mother. No, suspicion fell on Peter Griffin, Lois's husband. The evidence against Peter was entirely circumstantial, but it was compelling in its own way. Peter and Lois had been having marital problems, well-documented problems that everyone knew about. Peter's friends, usually loyal to a fault, found themselves unable to completely dismiss the possibility that Peter might have done something to Lois. When police searched the Griffin home and found drawings in the trash, drawings that depicted Lois being killed in various ways, suspicion turned to certainty in many people's minds. Peter was arrested. He was charged with murder in the first degree, despite the lack of a body. The trial was a media sensation, the kind of case that captured the attention of everyone in Quahog and beyond. The prosecution built their case meticulously, painting Peter as a man with motive, means, and opportunity. They got Peter to reveal things on the stand, things about his relationship with Lois, things that made him look guilty, even though they were just the typical dysfunctional patterns of the Griffin marriage. Brian stood by Peter throughout the trial. Brian knew Peter, knew his faults and his weaknesses, and being a murderer wasn't one of them. Peter was thoughtless, crude, insensitive, and often cruel in his stupidity, but he wasn't capable of actually killing Lois. Brian tried to convince Meg and Chris of their father's innocence, tried to keep the family together during this impossible situation, but the evidence seemed overwhelming to everyone else. The jury deliberated. They found Peter guilty. The judge was preparing to sentence Peter to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It seemed like this was it, the end of Peter Griffin as a free man, the destruction of the Griffin family. Stewie watched all of this with satisfaction, his revenge complete. Not only had he killed his mother, but he was going to watch his father be punished for the crime. It was almost too perfect. Then the doors to the courtroom burst open. Everyone turned. There, standing in the doorway, was a figure that shouldn't exist. A person who was supposed to be dead, whose body was supposedly at the bottom of the ocean. Lois Griffin walked into that courtroom, very much alive, and the entire case against Peter collapsed in an instant. The relief in the courtroom was palpable. Peter was freed. The charges dropped. The family rushed to embrace Lois, overjoyed that she was alive, that their wife and mother had returned to them. But the story wasn't over. Lois, once the initial joy of reunion had passed, had something to say. She looked directly at Stewie, her infant son, and told everyone in that courtroom exactly what had happened. She told them that Stewie had shot her, that her own child had tried to murder her. The courtroom fell silent. People looked at each other in confusion and disbelief. A baby? A 1-year-old child had attempted murder? It was absurd. It was impossible. It was the truth. Lois explained what had happened to her after she fell into the ocean. She had been shot, yes, multiple times. She should have died, but she didn't. In a twist that could only happen in the world of Family Guy, Lois had been rescued by a merman. An actual mythological creature, half man and half fish, had found Lois sinking into the depths and brought her to safety. He nursed her back to health, despite her injuries. However, Lois had suffered amnesia from the trauma. She couldn't remember who she was, where she was from, or what had happened to her. For an entire year, she wandered the country, a woman without a past, trying to piece together her identity. Eventually, she ended up at a place called Camp Put Down Ataforca, a fat camp in North Carolina. She was hired as a counselor there, spending her days trying to prevent overweight children from eating each other, which was exactly the kind of bizarre detail that made perfect sense in the Family Guy universe. Her memories finally returned, triggered by something she saw or heard at the camp. Everything came flooding back. The cruise, Peter's embarrassing behavior, going out on the deck for air, and then Stewie. Her own son, holding a machine gun, the look in his eyes, and the feeling of bullets tearing through her body. With her memories restored, Lois immediately made her way back to Quahog, arriving just in time to save Peter from prison and expose Stewie as the real villain. Now Stewie's crime was known. The perfect crime wasn't so perfect after all. His mother had survived, had returned, and had identified him as her attempted murderer. The jig was up. But Stewie wasn't ready to accept defeat. He wasn't ready to face justice or punishment. Instead, he did what any cornered evil genius would do. He escalated. Stewie grabbed Brian and forced him to drive to Washington, D.C. Brian, as usual, found himself caught up in Stewie's schemes, unable to say no, unable to stop the baby from his increasingly dangerous plans. They drove through the night, Stewie holding a weapon on Brian to ensure his cooperation, heading toward the nation's capital with a purpose that Brian didn't fully understand yet. When they arrived in D.C., Stewie's plan became clear. He wasn't running away. He wasn't trying to escape justice. No, Stewie had decided that if he was going down, he was taking the whole world with him. They broke into the CIA headquarters, Stewie using his genius to bypass security systems and get them into the building. Once inside, Stewie made his way to the CIA's supercomputer, the machine that controlled critical infrastructure around the globe. Stewie's fingers flew over the keyboard, hacking into systems that were supposed to be unhackable, taking control of networks that were supposed to be secure. Within minutes, he had done the impossible. Stewie Griffin, a 1-year-old baby, had taken control of the entire planet's power grid. Every light, every computer, every electrical system on Earth was now under his command. And he made his demands clear. He wanted to be president of the world. CIA agents Stan Smith and Avery Bullock, characters from the show American Dad, tried to stop Stewie, But what could they do? Stewie held all the cards. With a single command, he could plunge the entire world into darkness. He could cause chaos on an unimaginable scale. Faced with this threat, the world's governments had no choice. They had to comply. Stewie Griffin became president of the world through technological terrorism and the threat of global blackout. But Stewie didn't stop with just taking power. He had unfinished business back in Quahog. The Griffin family, now aware of what their youngest member had done, tried to return home, hoping to process everything that had happened. They walked through their front door, probably expecting some moment of normalcy, some chance to regroup and figure out what to do next. Instead, they found Stewie waiting for them, holding a military-grade handgun. The facade of innocence was completely gone now. Stewie stood there, weapon in hand, looking at his family with cold calculation. They all knew what he was capable of now. They all knew he had tried to kill Lois, had taken over the world's power grid, had declared himself global president. The question was, what would he do next? Stewie didn't waste time with threats or explanations. He restrained the entire family, tying them to chairs in their own living room, making them prisoners in their own home. Then, in a moment that demonstrated just how far Stewie had fallen into pure evil, Cleveland Brown walked through the door. Cleveland, the Griffin family's neighbor and friend, had no idea what was happening. He just walked in casually, probably looking for Peter, or wanting to hang out, completely oblivious to the danger. Stewie didn't hesitate. He shot Cleveland dead, right there in the Griffin living room, in front of the terrified family. The murder of Cleveland served multiple purposes for Stewie. It eliminated a potential threat, someone who might have been able to overpower him or call for help. But more than that, it sent a message to the Griffin family. It showed them that Stewie was serious, that he was willing to kill anyone, that their lives were hanging by a thread, and their continued existence depended entirely on their compliance. The casual nature of the killing, the matter-of-fact way Stewie executed their friend, drove home just how dangerous the situation had become. Stewie's reign as president of the world was marked by the kind of tyrannical behavior you'd expect from a power-mad baby genius. He ruled through fear and technological dominance, holding the entire planet hostage with his control over the power grid. The world bent to his will because it had no choice. But like all dictators, Stewie's downfall was inevitable. You can't rule the world forever, especially when you're still in diapers. The final confrontation came at the Griffin house. Peter and Lois, having somehow freed themselves from Stewie's restraints, confronted their youngest child. The battle that followed was something out of an action movie, completely absurd, but fitting for the extreme situation. Lois, channeling the character of John Rambo, wore combat gear and fought Stewie with determination and parental fury. The fight was extended, highly choreographed, and utterly ridiculous in the way only Family Guy could pull off. In the end, it was Peter who dealt the final blow. Peter Griffin, not known for his intelligence or skill, managed to kill Stewie. The baby genius, the would-be world dictator, the matricidal maniac, was shot and killed by his own father. Stewie's body flew backward from the impact, landing in a crumpled heap. The reign of terror was over. President Stewie was dead. The world could breathe a sigh of relief. But Peter and Lois couldn't celebrate. Despite everything Stewie had done, despite his attempts to kill Lois, his murder of Cleveland, his takeover of the world, he was still their son. They had just killed their own child. The weight of that action, the grief and trauma of having to end their baby's life, overcame them. They held each other, crying over what they had been forced to do, mourning, even though Stewie had become a monster. Then, just when viewers thought they understood what had happened, everything changed. The scene shifted. We saw Stewie, very much alive, sitting in a strange chair-like device. Brian walked in carrying postcards from Peter and Lois, who were still on their cruise, having a wonderful time. Stewie emerged from the device, and the truth was revealed. None of it had been real. The entire 2-episode arc, the shooting of Lois, the trial of Peter, Lois's survival and return, Stewie's takeover of the world, Cleveland's death, the final confrontation, all of it had been a simulation. Stewie had built a machine that allowed him to experience scenarios in virtual reality, to see how his plans would play out without actually having to commit to them. He had run the scenario of killing Lois to see what would happen, to see if he could really do it, and what the consequences would be. The simulation had shown Stewie that his matricidal plans wouldn't work out the way he hoped. He wouldn't get away with it cleanly. He wouldn't achieve the satisfaction he imagined. Instead, it would lead to a spiral of increasingly desperate and violent actions, culminating in global dictatorship and his own death at his father's hands. Faced with this knowledge, Stewie made a decision. His plans for world domination and matricide would have to wait. He wasn't ready. Not yet. This revelation recontextualized everything viewers had just watched. It raised questions about reality and simulation in the Family Guy universe. But more importantly, it showed just how far Stewie was willing to go in his planning. He had created a full simulation, complete with accurate personality models of everyone he knew, just to test out his evil schemes before committing to them. That level of planning and preparation, that commitment to evil, was chilling in its own way. But the story of Stewie's evil didn't end with simulated matricide. Throughout the series, Stewie demonstrated his capacity for cruelty in countless other ways. His relationship with Brian, the family dog, who was his closest friend and frequent companion, was marked by moments of genuine affection and moments of shocking violence. The duality of their relationship, the way Stewie could switch from caring friend to sadistic tormentor, illustrated the complexity of his evil nature. One of the most memorable and disturbing examples of Stewie's cruelty toward Brian came from an episode where sports betting became the catalyst for escalating violence. It started innocently enough, at least by Family Guy standards. Peter had gotten involved with the New England Patriots, and the episode was largely focused on his football career. But in the subplot, Stewie had set himself up as a bookie, taking bets on various sporting events. Brian, being Brian, couldn't resist the temptation to gamble. He placed a bet with Stewie on a celebrity boxing match, Mike Tyson versus Carol Channing. In Brian's mind, this was easy money. Tyson was a professional fighter, one of the most feared boxers of all time. Carol Channing was an elderly actress and singer. The outcome seemed obvious. Brian bet $50 that Tyson would win, confident in his prediction. The fight played out in typical Family Guy fashion, meaning it completely defied expectations and logic. Carol Channing, despite being drastically outmatched on paper, refused to stay down. Tyson beat her repeatedly, knocking her down again and again, but she kept getting back up. She demonstrated the kind of determination that would have been inspiring if it wasn't so absurd. In the end, to Brian's shock and horror, Carol Channing won the match. Brian had lost his bet. $50. That's all it was. $50 that Brian owed Stewie. In the normal world, this would be a minor issue between friends. Brian would pay up, maybe with some good-natured ribbing about his poor judgment. Or he might ask for some time to get the money together. It's the kind of debt that happens between friends all the time, usually resolved without major conflict. But Stewie wasn't a normal friend, and this wasn't a normal situation. At first, Stewie approached Brian calmly. He was polite, even friendly about it. He asked Brian for the money in a casual way, just a simple request between friends. Brian's response was dismissive. He didn't have the money right then, and he didn't seem particularly worried about when he'd be able to pay. He brushed off Stewie's request with an attitude that suggested the debt wasn't important, that Stewie would just have to wait. It was this casual dismissal, this lack of respect for the debt, that triggered what came next. Stewie accepted Brian's response calmly, even cheerfully. He drank from a glass of orange juice, commented on how good it was, and then, without warning or change in his pleasant demeanor, smashed the glass over Brian's head. The violence came out of nowhere, shocking in its suddenness and brutality. Brian screamed in pain and shock as glass shattered against his skull and orange juice mixed with blood running down his face. But Stewie wasn't done. Not even close. What followed was one of the most disturbing scenes in Family Guy history. A sustained beating that went on far longer than most cartoon violence. Stewie punched Brian in the face, repeatedly, with the force of someone much larger than a baby. He grabbed a towel rack and used it as a weapon, hitting Brian again and again, pausing occasionally just to let Brian scream in agony before continuing the assault. The beating continued with Stewie dunking Brian's head in the toilet, holding him under the water while Brian struggled and choked. Stewie kept demanding his money, kept asking where his money was, punctuating each question with another act of violence. He threw Brian around the bathroom like a rag doll, using whatever was at hand as a weapon. The scene was graphic, brutal, and went on much longer than typical cartoon violence, crossing the line from comedic exaggeration into something genuinely disturbing. When Stewie finally finished, when Brian was lying bloody and beaten on the bathroom floor, Stewie casually told him to clean himself up and gave him a deadline: 5 o'clock. Brian had until 5 o'clock to get the money, or things would get worse. The threat hung in the air as Stewie walked away, leaving Brian to crawl into the shower and try to process what had just happened to him over $50. Brian, desperate to avoid another beating, tried to hide from Stewie. He bought a fake mustache for $2.99, put it on as a disguise, and tried to sneak past Stewie. It was a pathetic attempt, the kind of thing that showed just how scared Brian had become. The disguise fooled no one. Stewie spotted Brian immediately, saw through the fake mustache in an instant, and the beating resumed with even more intensity. This time, Stewie pushed Brian down the stairs, the dog's body tumbling and crashing against each step. When Brian reached the bottom, dazed and in pain, Stewie produced a golf club and began beating him with it. He swung the club again and again, hitting Brian so hard that the club itself bent from the impact. Brian could barely move, could barely defend himself, completely at Stewie's mercy. Then Stewie pulled out a gun. Not a cartoon laser or a silly prop, but a realistic handgun. He pointed it at Brian's knees and fired. The bullet tore through Brian's left knee, shattering bone and cartilage. Brian's screams filled the air. He tried to plead with Stewie, tried to explain that he just needed more time, but Stewie shot his other knee before he could finish his sentence. Brian collapsed completely, unable to stand. Both legs ruined by gunshot wounds. The violence should have ended there. Brian was completely incapacitated, unable to escape or fight back. But Stewie had one more punishment in store. He pulled out a flamethrower and set Brian on fire. The dog's screams reached new heights as flames engulfed his body. Stewie stood there, watching Brian burn, completely unmoved by the suffering he was causing. Only when Brian finally agreed to pay, when he promised he would get the money immediately, did Stewie extinguish the flames. Brian managed to scrape together the $50. He paid Stewie, ending the immediate threat of violence. But Stewie, perhaps feeling some guilt over the extent of the torture, offered Brian something. One free revenge shot. Brian could hit Stewie however he wanted, whenever he wanted, and Stewie would accept it without retaliation. It was meant to make them even, to restore some balance to their friendship after the brutal beating. Brian accepted the offer, but he had no intention of taking his revenge immediately. Instead, he decided to play a psychological game with Stewie. Days passed. Weeks passed. Brian never took his free shot. Every time Stewie would see Brian, every time they were in the same room, Stewie would tense up, waiting for the attack that never came. The anticipation was killing him. When would Brian strike? How would he do it? Would it be physical? Would it be humiliating? The not knowing became its own form of torture. Stewie's paranoia grew to the point where he couldn't function normally. He would flinch at sudden movements. He would look over his shoulder constantly. The waiting, the uncertainty, drove him to the brink of a breakdown. Finally, unable to take the psychological torture anymore, Stewie started beating himself up. He punched himself, threw himself against walls, anything to satisfy the debt and end the waiting. But Brian still didn't consider it paid. The psychological torture continued. Eventually, when the family traveled to London for Peter's football game, Brian finally took his shot. He did it casually, almost as an afterthought. As they were walking down a London street, Brian simply pushed Stewie in front of a moving double-decker bus. The impact was brutal, sending Stewie flying through the air. The revenge was complete. The debt was paid, and Brian had proven that sometimes the anticipation of punishment is worse than the punishment itself. This incident with Brian over $50 demonstrated several disturbing aspects of Stewie's character. First, his capacity for disproportionate violence. $50 is nothing, a trivial amount, yet Stewie treated it as if Brian had stolen his life savings. The beating he administered was extreme, savage, and prolonged. It went far beyond what was necessary to make his point. Second, it showed his complete lack of empathy. Brian was his best friend, the one person in the Griffin household who truly understood him, and Stewie tortured him without hesitation or remorse. The friendship meant nothing in the face of the debt. But perhaps most disturbing was how quickly Stewie could shift from friend to monster and back again. After the debt was paid, after Brian took his revenge, things went back to normal between them. They resumed their friendship as if nothing had happened. Stewie didn't hold a grudge about being pushed in front of a bus. Brian didn't seem traumatized by the torture he'd endured. The violence was just something that happened, a temporary disruption in their relationship that was quickly forgotten. This casual approach to extreme violence, this ability to compartmentalize and move on, suggested a fundamental disconnect in Stewie's moral reasoning. The relationship between Stewie and Brian was always complex, mixing genuine affection with casual cruelty. They were best friends who regularly hurt each other in ways that should have destroyed their bond. But in the world they inhabited, violence was just another form of communication. Stewie could torture Brian one day and go on a road trip adventure with him the next, and neither saw any contradiction in this behavior. It was simply how they operated, in a world where actions rarely had lasting consequences, and today's victim could be tomorrow's companion. Another figure who found himself on the receiving end of Stewie's evil was Bertram, Stewie's half-brother and perhaps his only true equal. Bertram was born under unusual circumstances that only the insane world of Family Guy could produce. It started with Peter Griffin deciding to get a vasectomy after a pregnancy scare. Before the surgery, he went to donate sperm at the Quahog Cryolab, just in case he and Lois wanted another baby in the future. This was a responsible decision, or at least as responsible as Peter Griffin got. While at the sperm bank, Peter managed to knock over an entire rack of sperm samples. Dozens of vials shattered on the floor, the contents of who knows how many donations spilling across the tile. Peter, being Peter, panicked. Rather than admit what he'd done and face the consequences, he decided to fix the problem himself. He refilled all the vials personally, right there in the donation room. Every single one. The fact that this meant multiple women would be receiving Peter Griffin's sperm instead of their intended donors didn't occur to him. Or if it did, he didn't care. The important thing was that he wouldn't get in trouble. Among the recipients of Peter's mislabeled sperm was a lesbian couple. They had gone through the proper channels, selected their donor, planned their family carefully. They had no idea that the vial they received contained the genetic material of an overweight, dim-witted alcoholic from Quahog, instead of whatever carefully selected donor they had chosen. 9 months later, they gave birth to a baby boy. They named him Bertram. Bertram, like Stewie, was not a normal infant. He possessed the same advanced intelligence, the same ability to speak, the same football-shaped head. He was, in every meaningful way, Stewie's equal. They were half-brothers, sharing Peter's genetics, and they shared the curse or gift of being baby geniuses trapped in infant bodies. But unlike Stewie, who had been the sole genius, baby in his world, Bertram now had competition, and neither of them was happy about it. Their first real confrontation came at a playground in Quahog. Stewie had declared himself the supreme ruler of the playground, forcing all the other children to bow to his authority. He was the king, the dictator, the absolute monarch of the swing sets and slides. The other kids accepted this because they had no choice. Stewie's intelligence and willingness to use force made resistance futile. It was easier to just go along with whatever he wanted. Then Bertram arrived at the playground with his mothers. He looked around, saw Stewie sitting on his throne of playground equipment, and immediately recognized a kindred spirit. Another intelligent baby. Another football-headed genius. But rather than feeling kinship or brotherhood, Bertram felt only rivalry. He didn't want to share the playground with Stewie. He wanted to rule it himself. And so, in front of all the other children, Bertram challenged Stewie's authority. He declared war. The conflict that followed was like something out of a military thriller, except with babies instead of soldiers. Both Stewie and Bertram had access to advanced technology. Both were strategic thinkers, capable of complex planning. Both were willing to do whatever it took to win. The playground became their battlefield, and the other children became unwilling participants in their war. The first major engagement was an aerial battle. Stewie deployed his fleet of miniature fighter jets, scaled-down versions of military aircraft that he had somehow built or acquired. Bertram countered with attack helicopters. The sky above the playground filled with military aircraft, all sized for infant pilots, firing weapons at each other. Bullets flew. Missiles launched. Explosions rocked the playground equipment. Somehow, despite the incredible violence of the battle, neither side gained a clear advantage. Both Stewie and Bertram proved to be skilled commanders, matching each other move for move. When conventional warfare failed to produce a winner, Bertram resorted to more insidious tactics. He decided to use biological warfare against Stewie. He had noticed that Stewie had developed a relationship with a young girl at the playground, a little girlfriend who seemed quite fond of him. Bertram saw an opportunity. He infected this girl with chickenpox, turning her into an unwitting bioweapon. When she next played with Stewie, she passed the virus to him. Stewie fell ill with chickenpox, covered in itchy spots, weakened by fever. While he was incapacitated, Bertram seized control of the playground. The other children, seeing that Stewie was vulnerable, switched their allegiance to Bertram. Even Stewie's girlfriend abandoned him, becoming a servant to Bertram. It seemed like Bertram had won. He stood atop the playground equipment, master of all he surveyed, while Stewie suffered at home with his illness. But Stewie was not defeated. Once he recovered from the chickenpox, he began planning his counterattack. He spent days preparing, gathering intelligence on Bertram's operation, looking for weaknesses in his security. When he was ready, Stewie infiltrated the playground at night. He moved through the shadows, taking out Bertram's guards one by one. These were other children that Bertram had recruited, kids who thought they were playing soldiers, but found themselves facing a genuinely dangerous opponent. Stewie made his way to the center of the playground, where Bertram had set up his command post. There, in the moonlight, the two half-brothers faced each other for the final confrontation. Words were exchanged, insults were hurled, and then they drew their weapons. Not guns or missiles this time, but swords. They engaged in a sword fight, dueling across the playground equipment like knights of old. If knights of old were one-year-old babies with advanced vocabularies and homicidal tendencies. The fight was intense, both combatants evenly matched in skill and determination. They parried and thrust, dodged and struck, neither willing to yield. But gradually, Stewie began to gain the upper hand. He was fighting on his home turf, the playground he had ruled for so long. He knew every corner, every hiding spot, every advantage. And slowly, methodically, he drove Bertram back until finally he disarmed him, sending Bertram's sword flying into the darkness. Bertram stood there, defeated, weaponless, at Stewie's mercy. And the episode ended with Stewie standing over his fallen half-brother, sword in hand, the clear victor of their war. Later that night, in a scene that seemed ominous, Stewie was shown digging a hole with Christopher Moltisanti, a character from The Sopranos. Viewers were led to believe that the hole was for Bertram's body, that Stewie had killed his half-brother and was now disposing of the evidence. But then came the twist. The hole wasn't for a body at all. It was for a tree, a young sapling that Stewie and Christopher were planting. When asked what happened to Bertram, Stewie claimed that his half-brother had admitted defeat and ran away. Christopher called Bertram a mook, and that seemed to be the end of it. Bertram had lost, survived, and departed. The war was over. Except it wasn't, because Bertram would return. Their rivalry was too perfect, too evenly matched, to end with just one confrontation. These two baby geniuses, these half-brothers who shared intelligence and ruthlessness in equal measure, were destined to clash again. And when they did, the stakes would be even higher, the danger even greater, and the evil that Stewie would display even more profound. But before we continue with Bertram's return, we need to examine another aspect of Stewie's evil, one that involved neither world domination nor family conflicts. Sometimes Stewie's evil was more personal, more intimate, focused on romantic jealousy and revenge. Sometimes the most dangerous version of Stewie was Stewie in love. Her name was Olivia Fuller, and she was the most famous toddler actress in Quahog. Where Stewie was a genius focused on world domination and matricide, Olivia was a prodigy focused on her career in entertainment. She was talented, ambitious, and incredibly stuck up. She believed herself to be superior to everyone around her, reluctant to work with anyone she deemed less talented than herself. In other words, she was a perfect match for Stewie's ego. Their first collaboration happened at the Quahog School of Performing Arts. Stewie had joined the Rising Star program there, impressing the instructors with his natural talent and sophisticated demeanor. Olivia was already a star at the school, the brightest talent in their program. When they were paired together for a musical number, magic happened. They performed a duet that was absolutely spectacular. Their voices blended perfectly. Their stage presence was undeniable, and the chemistry between them crackled with both talent and tension. For a while, they were the perfect partnership. Two child stars, both at the top of their game, working together to create something special. But inevitably, as often happens with creative partnerships, they had a falling out. Creative differences, they called it. Arguments over artistic direction. Disagreements about how to interpret a song. Clashes of ego that neither was willing to back down from. The partnership dissolved, and they went their separate ways, each convinced that they were the true talent in the duo, and the other had been holding them back. Time passed. Stewie continued his various schemes for world domination and matricide. Olivia's career in entertainment continued, reaching new heights when she became the spokesperson for Tasty Juice, a popular beverage company. Her face was everywhere, on commercials and billboards, the most famous toddler in Quahog and perhaps beyond. She had achieved the kind of success that most child actors only dream about. Then, as quickly as it had risen, Olivia's career began to collapse. Tasty Juice dropped her as their spokesperson. The specific reasons were never made entirely clear, but in the fickle world of entertainment, reasons rarely matter. One day, you're the face of a brand. The next day, you're yesterday's news. Without the major contract, other opportunities dried up. Casting directors stopped calling. Her agent had fewer auditions to send her to. Olivia Fuller, the most famous toddler actress in Quahog, was experiencing the downward slide that so many child stars face. Her last public appearance was scheduled to be at the Quahog Mall, where she would open a new store called Brat Wraps. It was a significant step down from national television commercials, but it was work, and Olivia needed to maintain her public profile however she could. When Stewie heard about this appearance, he saw an opportunity. He had heard about Olivia's career troubles, knew that she was vulnerable, and decided that this was the perfect time to get revenge for their falling out years ago. Stewie made plans to go to the mall opening specifically to heckle Olivia. He was going to stand in the crowd and mock her, make fun of her reduced circumstances, humiliate her in front of whatever audience showed up for the event. It would be petty revenge, but Stewie excelled at pettiness. He looked forward to seeing Olivia's face when she recognized him in the crowd, heckling her while she tried to maintain her composure and do her job. But when Stewie actually arrived at the mall and saw Olivia again, something unexpected happened. He felt attraction. Despite their rivalry, despite his plans for revenge, despite everything that had happened between them, Stewie found himself drawn to her. She was still talented, still carried herself with that confidence that bordered on arrogance, still had that spark that had made their original partnership so electric. And in that moment, looking at her on stage opening a store in a mall, Stewie forgot all about heckling and humiliation. He wanted her back. Stewie approached Olivia after the event, pretending their meeting was accidental. He bumped into her outside the store, acted surprised to see her, made small talk like they were old friends reconnecting by chance. He tried to be charming, to remind her of the good times they'd had working together. He even invited her to come over and spend time with him. But Olivia wasn't interested. She remembered their falling out, remembered how difficult Stewie could be, and she had no desire to rekindle any kind of relationship with him. She blew him off, politely but firmly, and walked away. Stewie, crushed by this rejection, went to Brian for advice. How could he win Olivia over? How could he make her see him as more than just her former difficult partner? Brian, being Brian, gave advice that was meant to be sarcastic, a joke that Stewie wasn't supposed to take seriously. But Stewie, desperate and not great at reading social cues when his emotions were involved, took Brian's joke as genuine advice. Brian had suggested, in jest, that women respond to men who treat them badly. He had used their neighbor Glenn Quagmire as an example. Quagmire, the pilot who lived down the street, was notoriously terrible to women, and yet women kept coming back to him. It was a dark observation about toxic relationship dynamics, delivered as a joke. But Stewie heard it as a strategy. If women responded to men who mistreated them, then he would mistreat Olivia. He would be mean to her, treat her cruelly, and she would fall for him. Stewie transformed himself into a bad boy stereotype. He adopted a rebellious aesthetic, all attitude and studied indifference. When he next encountered Olivia, he was cold and dismissive, treating her with the kind of casual cruelty that sometimes attracted people. And incredibly, horrifyingly, it worked. Olivia responded positively to this treatment. She found Stewie's new attitude attractive. She started spending time with him, drawn to the bad boy persona he had adopted. They began dating in the way that toddlers date. They sat in the park eating ice cream and mocking other people. They attended birthday parties together. They bonded over their shared sense of superiority and their willingness to be cruel about others. Stewie introduced Olivia to his teddy bear Rupert, presenting him as if Rupert was a real person whose opinion mattered. Olivia introduced Stewie to her old friend Victor, another child actor, at one of these birthday parties. Stewie immediately disliked Victor. He was jealous of any attention Olivia gave to other people, especially other boys. When Olivia asked Stewie to get punch for both her and Victor, Stewie's resentment grew. He didn't want to serve Victor. He wanted Victor to disappear, but he got the punch, playing the role of dutiful boyfriend while internally seething with jealousy. The relationship between Stewie and Olivia deteriorated quickly after that. They argued constantly, bickering about everything and nothing. Their dates became exercises in barely contained hostility. They critiqued each other, insulted each other, made each other miserable. But neither wanted to be the one to end the relationship. Both were too proud, too stubborn, too invested in winning this particular battle of wills. In a moment of absurdist escalation that was pure Family Guy, Stewie and Olivia's argument ended with them getting married. It wasn't a real marriage, obviously. They were toddlers playing at adult relationships. Rupert officiated the ceremony, standing in as both minister and witness. But Stewie and Olivia treated it as real, committing themselves to each other in a mock wedding that was supposed to solve all their problems. It didn't. The marriage made everything worse. Now, instead of just being a fighting couple, they were a fighting married couple. They had all the resentments and frustrations of a failing relationship, combined with the added weight of marital commitment. They made each other miserable, but they stayed together because that's what married couples do, even when those married couples are 1-year-olds who shouldn't be married in the first place. Brian, watching this disaster unfold, tried to salvage the situation by arranging a double date. Brian would bring his girlfriend Jillian, and they would all go out together. Maybe with another couple present, Stewie and Olivia would be forced to behave better. Maybe they would remember why they liked each other in the first place. Maybe the evening would help them reconnect. It was worth a try anyway. The double date was a catastrophe. Stewie and Olivia argued throughout the entire evening. They bickered about the menu, fought about what to order, disagreed about everything. Other diners started complaining about the noise. When one person asked them to be quiet, Stewie started an argument with that person too, expanding the conflict beyond just his failing relationship with Olivia. The evening ended with nothing resolved, and everything somehow worse than it had been before. Brian, still trying to help, encouraged Stewie to work on the relationship. He told Stewie that all relationships have rough patches, that what mattered was commitment and effort. Stewie, taking this advice to heart, decided to return to Olivia and try to make things work. He went to their playhouse, the cardboard structure where they spent time together, preparing to apologize and recommit to making their marriage function. When Stewie arrived at the playhouse, he found something that shattered whatever remained of their relationship. Olivia was inside with Victor. They were playing together, laughing, having fun in a way that Olivia never seemed to have fun with Stewie anymore. Specifically, they were playing with Silly Putty, the stretchy toy that Stewie had bought for Olivia as a gift. She had told him she loved it, had thanked him for his thoughtfulness, and now she was playing with it with another boy. In Stewie's mind, this was the ultimate betrayal. In his 1-year-old understanding of relationships, playing with someone else with a gift your partner gave you was essentially cheating. It didn't matter that they were children. It didn't matter that playing with Silly Putty was innocent. What mattered was that Olivia had chosen to spend time with Victor instead of working on her relationship with Stewie. She had chosen fun over commitment. She had chosen another boy over her husband. Olivia tried to explain. She tried to tell Stewie that it wasn't what it looked like, that she and Victor were just friends, that playing with Silly Putty meant nothing. But Stewie didn't want to hear explanations. He didn't want to talk about it or work through it. The jealousy and rage that had been building throughout their relationship finally found an outlet, and that outlet was violence. Stewie calmly walked out of the playhouse. Olivia might have thought he was just leaving, walking away to cool off and process what he'd seen. But Stewie had no intention of just walking away. He had a plan, and he was going to execute it immediately. He went around to the outside of the cardboard playhouse, to where Olivia and Victor couldn't see him. And then, without hesitation or remorse, he set the playhouse on fire. The cardboard structure went up in flames quickly. Cardboard is an excellent fuel, burning hot and fast. Within seconds, the playhouse was engulfed. Inside, Olivia and Victor were trapped. They were too young to understand fully what was happening, too small to break through the burning walls. Stewie stood outside, watching the flames grow, watching the structure collapse, and he laughed. He laughed with genuine evil joy, the kind of laughter that comes from a place of pure malice. The episode ended there, with the playhouse burning and Olivia and Victor's fate uncertain. No fire department was shown arriving. No adults came running. No one emerged from the flames. It was left ambiguous whether Olivia and Victor survived, or whether Stewie had successfully murdered two toddlers in a fit of jealous rage. For years, fans debated. Did they die? Did they escape? The show didn't provide immediate answers. Olivia would eventually appear in later episodes, confirming that she had survived the fire somehow. Victor's fate remained unknown, leaving open the possibility that Stewie had successfully killed him. But regardless of whether his victims survived or died, the intent was clear. Stewie had tried to murder them. He had set a fire with two children inside, knowing they were trapped, wanting them to burn to death. All because of jealousy over a fake marriage to a fellow toddler. This incident showcased a different flavor of Stewie's evil compared to his grand schemes of world domination or his plots to kill Lois. This was personal evil. Intimate violence born from rejected love and wounded pride. This was Stewie at his most petty and most dangerous, using deadly force over a child's playground relationship. The disproportion between cause and effect was staggering. Playing with silly putty with another boy warranted attempted murder in Stewie's mind. As Stewie walked away from the burning playhouse, he made a declaration to Brian, who had witnessed the whole thing. He said that he didn't like women and relationships, and that he wished he could do the same things, but with the same gender. Brian, ever helpful, informed him that was called being gay. Stewie found this intriguing, a revelation that would influence his character development in future episodes. But in that moment, walking away from what might have been a double homicide, Stewie's main emotion wasn't curiosity about his sexuality. It was satisfaction at having enacted his revenge. The pattern of Stewie's evil was becoming clear. Whether the victim was his mother, his best friend, his half-brother, or his girlfriend, Stewie's response to conflict was always disproportionately violent. He didn't do measured responses. He didn't believe in proportional retaliation. When Stewie felt wronged, his instinct was to escalate to the maximum level of violence immediately. $50 owed, torture, and attempted murder. Playground rivalry, full-scale warfare. Romantic jealousy, burn them alive. There was no middle ground in Stewie's world, no concept of an appropriate response. There was only total war or nothing. This lack of proportionality was one of the things that made Stewie truly frightening as a character. Most villains, even cartoon villains, have some sense of scale. They calibrate their evil to match the situation. But Stewie's dial was stuck on maximum. Every slight was a mortal insult. Every conflict was a battle to the death. Every problem could be solved with murder. It didn't matter if the issue was trivial or serious. Stewie's response was always the same level of extreme violence. And perhaps most disturbing of all was how quickly Stewie could return to normal after committing these atrocities. He didn't dwell on what he'd done. He didn't seem haunted by his actions. Setting a fire that might have killed two children didn't keep him up at night. Torturing his best friend over a gambling debt didn't damage their relationship long term. Attempting to murder his mother resulted in no lasting guilt or remorse. Stewie could commit horrific acts of violence and then go back to being a cute baby, playing with his teddy bear, watching television, living his life as if nothing had happened. This ability to compartmentalize, to separate his evil actions from his everyday existence, suggested something deeply wrong with Stewie's psychology. Normal people, even fictional cartoon characters, carry the weight of their actions. They feel guilt, remorse, regret. They're changed by the violent things they do. But not Stewie. He could burn children alive one day and be concerned about his favorite TV show the next, with no apparent connection between these two aspects of his life. The question that viewers had to grapple with was whether Stewie was truly evil or whether he was simply a child who didn't understand the consequences of his actions. Was he a baby with adult intelligence but child emotions, unable to fully grasp the permanence of death and the suffering caused by violence? Or was he a genuine psychopath who understood exactly what he was doing and simply didn't care? The show never provided a clear answer, leaving it ambiguous whether Stewie was a monster in baby's clothing or a baby playing at being a monster without fully comprehending what that meant. What made this ambiguity even more unsettling was how the show treated these questions. Family Guy never provided easy answers or clear moral judgments about Stewie's behavior. The other characters rarely seemed disturbed by what he did, even when they were his victims. The world continued to function normally despite his atrocities. This created a moral vacuum around Stewie, a space where evil actions existed without consequences or condemnation, where attempted murder was just another day in Quahog. But perhaps we're getting too philosophical. Let's return to the concrete examples of Stewie's evil, because there are so many more to explore. One that stands out for its sheer pettiness involved something as simple as a lemonade stand. Children across America set up lemonade stands every summer, trying to earn a few dollars selling drinks to passers-by. It's an innocent childhood activity, a first lesson in entrepreneurship and customer service. But when Stewie Griffin set up a lemonade stand, innocence went out the window. Stewie needed money. The specific reason varied depending on which version of the story you heard, but the need was genuine. He set up his lemonade stand in front of the Griffin house, arranged his supplies, and waited for customers. He called out to people walking by, trying to attract their attention, trying to make a sale. But nobody stopped. Nobody wanted his lemonade. Person after person walked past without acknowledging him, without even looking at his stand. For most children, this would be disappointing, but ultimately harmless. They might pack up early, feeling discouraged, or they might keep trying with different tactics. But Stewie's response to this rejection was characteristically extreme. When a man walked past without buying anything, Stewie grabbed a baseball bat. He didn't threaten the man or try to intimidate him into buying lemonade. No, Stewie went straight to violence. First, he attacked the man's knees with the bat, a calculated assault designed to bring the victim down to ground level. The man screamed in pain as his kneecaps shattered. Before he could recover or call for help, Stewie hit him over the head with the bat, knocking him unconscious. Then, with the man lying bleeding on the sidewalk, Stewie calmly rifled through his wallet, stealing $6. $6. That's what this assault earned him. $6 that he took from an unconscious man who now had shattered knees and a severe head injury. But Stewie wasn't finished. He looked at the photos in the man's wallet and made a comment about the man's wife, suggesting that maybe he'd look her up while her husband was in the hospital. It was a threat, casual and cruel, delivered to an unconscious man who couldn't hear it. Then, as a final gesture of contempt, Stewie poured lemonade over the man's unconscious body and walked away, leaving his victim lying on the street. This incident perfectly encapsulated a particular type of Stewie evil. It wasn't grand or theatrical. There was no world domination plot, no elaborate scheme. Just a baby with a baseball bat, willing to commit assault and robbery over $6 because nobody would buy his lemonade. The casualness of it, the way Stewie moved from making lemonade to committing violent crime without any apparent mental transition, demonstrated how easily he could shift into violence mode. What made it even more disturbing was the premeditation. Stewie had a baseball bat ready and available at his lemonade stand. This suggests he had planned for the possibility of violence from the beginning. He wasn't just a baby trying to sell lemonade who snapped in frustration. He was a baby who brought a weapon to his lemonade stand, anticipating that he might need to hurt someone. The violence wasn't a loss of control. It was calculated, planned, and executed efficiently. The road to episodes provided another venue for Stewie's evil to manifest. These special episodes featured Stewie and Brian going on adventures to various locations, parodying the old Bob Hope and Bing Crosby road movies. While many of these episodes were relatively lighthearted by Family Guy standards, some contained moments of genuine darkness that showcased Stewie at his worst. The Road to the North Pole episode was particularly disturbing in this regard. It started, as so many of Stewie's evil acts did, with a petty grievance. Stewie wanted to see Santa Claus at the mall, to sit on his lap and tell him what he wanted for Christmas. Brian took him to the mall, and they waited in line with all the other children and their parents. They waited for a long time, moving slowly through the queue as Santa dealt with each child in turn. Finally, after what must have felt like forever to an impatient 1-year-old, they reached the front of the line. And then the mall, Santa left. His shift was over, and he walked away without seeing Stewie. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a Santa walking away from a baby who had waited patiently for his turn. To Stewie, this wasn't just disappointing or frustrating. This was a betrayal of the highest order. Santa Claus, the figure of childhood joy and generosity, had turned his back on him. This could not stand. This required revenge. This required murder. Stewie declared his intention to go to the North Pole and kill Santa Claus. Brian, not believing in Santa's existence, tried to dissuade him. When that didn't work, Brian tried to trick Stewie by taking him to a Santa-themed amusement park, hoping Stewie would believe it was the real North Pole. But Stewie saw through the deception immediately. He could tell the difference between a commercial attraction and the actual workshop of Santa Claus. The fake North Pole only made him angrier, only strengthened his resolve. So they continued north, through a series of mishaps and adventures. Stewie accidentally caused a major traffic accident that destroyed Brian's car. They hitched rides, stole a snowmobile, trudged through snow and ice. Brian kept trying to convince Stewie that Santa wasn't real, that this whole journey was pointless. But Stewie refused to give up. He was going to find Santa, and he was going to kill him, and nothing Brian said could change his mind. When they finally reached the North Pole, they found something unexpected. Santa was real. The workshop was real. The elves were real. But it wasn't the magical Christmas wonderland of children's stories. Instead, they found a nightmare. The workshop had become a massive industrial complex, spewing pollution into the Arctic air. The elves were mutated and deformed, the result of inbreeding as Santa desperately tried to keep up with the world's growing population and increasing demands for gifts. The reindeer had devolved into carnivorous monsters that ate the elves who wandered outside. And Santa himself? Santa was a broken man. He was sick, exhausted, and depressed. The jolly gift giver of legend had been ground down by the impossible demands placed upon him. Every year, more children. Every year, more gifts. Every year, more elaborate toys that took longer to make. Santa was dying under the weight of the world's greed, and his workshop had become a hellish factory that destroyed everything and everyone in it. Stewie, confronting this dying old man, found his murder plans evaporating. There was no satisfaction in killing someone who wanted to die, who was already being killed by the weight of his responsibilities. Instead, when Santa collapsed from his illness, Stewie and Brian made a different decision. They would deliver the presents themselves. They would take on Santa's role for one night, save Christmas, and prove that it could be done. This seemed like a redemptive turn for Stewie. Here was a moment of genuine heroism, where the evil baby was setting aside his murderous intentions to help someone in need. But the execution of this plan revealed that Stewie's capacity for evil hadn't diminished. It had just found a new outlet. Brian and Stewie took Santa's sleigh and flew to their first house. They crashed through a tree, getting the reindeer stuck. They went down the chimney but forgot the presents. When they went back outside to get the presents, they locked themselves out and had to break a window to get back inside. The noise of breaking glass and their bumbling around the house woke the family who lived there. The father came downstairs to investigate, thinking he was confronting burglars, which, technically, he was. Brian and Stewie were breaking and entering, even if their intentions were nominally good. The father was understandably alarmed to find a baby and a dog in his home in the middle of the night. He was going to call the police. And that's when Stewie escalated to violence. Stewie grabbed a baseball bat, his weapon of choice, and attacked the father. He beat the man over the head repeatedly, brutally, with the kind of savage violence that went far beyond what was necessary to stop him from calling the police. The father collapsed, bleeding and possibly dying from his head injuries. The man's wife came down to see what was happening, and Stewie knocked her out too. Then, to ensure there were no witnesses, Stewie found the couple's young daughter and duct taped her mouth and body, immobilizing the terrified child who had just watched a baby attack her parents. With the family subdued, Brian and Stewie prepared to leave the presence and move on to the next house. That's when they realized their mistake. They had the wrong address. This wasn't even a house on their delivery list. They had just committed a home invasion, assaulted 2 adults, traumatized a child, and it was all for nothing. They were in the wrong house. The implications of this were staggering. They had no reason to be in this home. The family they attacked had done nothing wrong. They weren't even on Santa's naughty list. They were innocent people who woke up to find intruders in their home, and those intruders responded with savage violence. Stewie had beaten a man nearly to death, possibly to death, for trying to protect his family from what he correctly identified as a home invasion. Brian wanted to help the family, to untape the daughter, to call an ambulance for the parents. But Stewie heard sirens in the distance. The police were coming, probably called by neighbors who heard the commotion. They needed to leave immediately or risk being caught. So they fled, leaving behind a traumatized child still taped up, parents who might be dying from their injuries, and a house full of evidence of their crime. They flew away in Santa's sleigh, and the episode never showed what happened to that family. The darkness of this scene was profound. These weren't villains or antagonists. This wasn't Bertram or some enemy of the Griffin family. This was a random family, selected by mistake, who suffered horrific violence for no reason other than bad luck and Stewie's willingness to use extreme force to solve problems. The father's injuries appeared severe enough that he might not have survived. Stewie might have killed an innocent man in front of his wife and daughter, all while trying to play Santa Claus. After this disaster, Stewie and Brian realized they couldn't complete Santa's deliveries. It was impossible. The task was too large, too complex, and they had already spent over an hour dealing with just one house, the wrong house at that. So they abandoned the delivery plan and went with a different approach. They went on television, brought the dying Santa with them, and pleaded with the world to reduce their Christmas demands. They asked people to limit themselves to one gift per person, to show some restraint, to save Christmas by saving Santa. The world agreed. By the next Christmas, Santa had recovered. The workshop was restored to its former glory, and everything was back to normal. It was a happy ending, in a way. But it didn't erase what Stewie had done. That family he attacked, that father he beat with a baseball bat, that little girl he duct taped while she watched her parents being assaulted, those consequences remained, even if the show never addressed them again. Stewie had committed attempted murder and child abuse while trying to save Christmas, and he walked away from it without any real consequences or guilt. This was a pattern with Stewie. Even when he was trying to do something good, even when his intentions were nominally heroic, his methods involved such extreme violence that the goodness of his goals became questionable. Saving Christmas is a noble aim. Home invasion, assault with a deadly weapon, and terrorizing a child are not noble methods. But Stewie saw no contradiction between these things. Violence was simply his default solution to any obstacle, regardless of whether that obstacle was an enemy who deserved it, or an innocent person in the wrong place at the wrong time. The road to episodes also featured other moments of casual evil from Stewie, though none quite reached the level of the North Pole incident. In Road to Rhode Island, while traveling with Brian to visit Brian's mother, Stewie participated in events that led to at least one person's death. During a motel stay, Stewie overheard what sounded like a drug deal happening in the next room. Unable to sleep because of the noise, Stewie yelled through the wall that the buyer was wearing a wire, presumably leading to that person's murder by drug dealers. It was a casual action, done purely out of annoyance at the noise, with no thought given to the life he was endangering. Throughout the series, Stewie demonstrated this pattern repeatedly. He would harm or kill people over minor annoyances, without remorse or second thoughts. Someone making noise? Get them killed. Someone not buying lemonade? Beat them unconscious and rob them. Someone in the way of playing Santa? Nearly beat them to death with a baseball bat. The scale of the offense never mattered to Stewie. Everything warranted maximum violence. But perhaps the most disturbing manifestation of Stewie's evil came when he tried to recapture his villainous nature after feeling like he'd gone soft. Brian had made a comment about Stewie losing his edge, becoming less evil, and Stewie took this criticism to heart. He decided he needed to become more evil, to reclaim the villainous identity that had defined his early character. So he built a machine designed to increase his evil. It was a device that would extract and amplify the darkest parts of his personality, making him into the ultimate version of himself. The machine didn't work as intended. Or rather, it worked too well. Instead of making Stewie more evil, it created something else entirely. The machine produced a clone of Stewie, a perfect physical copy. But this clone, which came to be known as Evil Stewie, embodied only Stewie's worst qualities. All the intelligence and ambition were there, but none of the restraint, none of the occasional moments of humanity. Evil Stewie was what Stewie would be if he had absolutely no limits, no conscience, no connection to anyone or anything except his own desires. You could tell Evil Stewie apart from the original by his clothing. While regular Stewie wore red overalls with a yellow shirt, Evil Stewie wore yellow overalls with a red shirt. It was a simple visual distinction, an inversion that represented the deeper inversion of morality. But in every other way, they looked identical. Same football-shaped head, same size, same voice. They were twins, separated only by the colors they wore and the amount of evil in their hearts. Evil Stewie wasted no time in demonstrating his nature. His first target was Brian, who was sleeping peacefully when Evil Stewie attacked. The clone tried to strangle Brian with his own collar, choking him nearly to death. When that didn't work, Evil Stewie shoved batteries up Brian's nose, a bizarre and cruel form of torture. The regular Stewie appeared and rescued Brian, fighting off his evil clone and driving him away temporarily. But Evil Stewie wasn't done with Brian. Not even close. Later, when Brian was reading, peacefully, Evil Stewie returned. He cut off Brian's tail with a sharp implement, causing tremendous pain and permanently disfiguring the dog. Then, to add insult to injury, Evil Stewie forced the severed tail down regular Stewie's throat, choking him with his best friend's body part. Both Brian and Stewie were left in agony, while Evil Stewie laughed and walked away, ready to cause more chaos. Evil Stewie went outside and found a woman driving past in her car. For no reason other than the opportunity presenting itself, he attacked her. Using a machete, he cut her in half, brutally murdering her in broad daylight. Then he stole her car and drove off, leaving her bisected corpse in the street. This was murder for convenience, killing someone just to take their vehicle, with no more thought than someone might give to calling a taxi. There was also a deleted scene that made Evil Stewie's nature even more explicit. In this scene, Evil Stewie found the child who had knocked over regular Stewie's sandcastle at the beach. Evil Stewie tortured this child, giving him a noogie that apparently continued until the child died. Then, when the child's parents came home, Evil Stewie murdered them too. 3 people dead over a destroyed sandcastle that wasn't even Evil Stewie's. He was avenging a wrong done to his original self, taking revenge beyond any reasonable scale, killing an entire family over beach play. The regular Stewie realized that evil Stewie needed to be stopped. This clone represented everything Stewie was capable of, without any restraint, and even Stewie could see that this was too much. So he devised a plan to capture and destroy his evil duplicate. Stewie tied Brian to a flagpole and used him as bait, knowing that evil Stewie wouldn't be able to resist the opportunity to torture Brian some more. The plan worked. Evil Stewie showed up, delighted to find Brian helpless and tied up, ready to inflict more pain. But before he could act, regular Stewie ambushed him. The two fought, a brutal battle between identical babies with identical abilities. They grappled and punched, kicked and bit, neither willing to yield to the other. During the fight, both of their clothes came off, leaving them in just their diapers, completely identical in appearance. Brian managed to free himself from the flagpole during the fight. He grabbed a gun, ready to shoot evil Stewie and end this threat. But there was a problem. With both Stewies naked, Brian couldn't tell which was which. They looked exactly the same. They sounded the same. There was no way to identify the evil clone versus the original. Brian stood there, gun raised, pointing it back and forth between the two identical babies, desperately trying to figure out which one to shoot. Brian came up with a solution. Earlier in the episode, Stewie had been amused by his own feet, laughing at them for reasons only Stewie understood. So Brian told both of them to look at their feet. One Stewie looked down and immediately started laughing, finding his feet hilarious. The other Stewie looked confused, not understanding why anyone would find feet amusing. Brian shot the confused one, betting everything on the assumption that only the real Stewie would laugh at his own feet. The gamble paid off. The Stewie that Brian shot was evil Stewie. The clone died, and the threat was ended. Brian and Stewie walked away, relieved that the crisis was over. But then, in the final moments of the episode, Stewie turned back to look at the camera. His eyes had changed. They were yellow, cat-like, glowing with malevolence. And a sinister laugh echoed through the air, the kind of laugh that suggested something had gone wrong with Brian's solution. The implication was clear, if ambiguous. Had Brian shot the wrong Stewie? Was the surviving Stewie actually the evil clone, pretending to be the original? Or had the creation of evil Stewie somehow corrupted regular Stewie, infecting him with his clone's pure malevolence? The show never provided a definitive answer, leaving viewers to wonder and worry about what that yellow-eyed glance meant. What made evil Stewie so disturbing wasn't just his actions, though those were horrific enough. It was what he represented. He was Stewie without limitations. Stewie without any redeeming qualities. Stewie with nothing but pure evil driving his every decision. And the terrifying thing was how easily evil Stewie had been created. Regular Stewie had built a machine to make himself more evil, and instead it had extracted and embodied all his worst qualities. This suggested that all of evil Stewie's capacity for violence and cruelty was already inside regular Stewie, just waiting to be released. The regular Stewie had moments of kindness. He loved his teddy bear Rupert. He had genuine affection for Brian, despite regularly hurting him. He sometimes showed concern for other people. These moments of humanity suggested that Stewie wasn't purely evil, that there was good mixed in with the bad. But evil Stewie proved that the evil was substantial enough to sustain an entire separate being. There was enough darkness in Stewie to create another whole person made entirely of malevolence. And after evil Stewie was defeated, after regular Stewie had fought and destroyed his dark duplicate, that yellow-eyed glance suggested the darkness hadn't really been eliminated. It had just been reintegrated. Evil Stewie was dead, but his evil had returned to its source, making regular Stewie perhaps even more dangerous than before. The experience of fighting his own evil nature might have made Stewie more aware of his capacity for darkness, or it might have made him more comfortable with it. Either way, The episode ended with uncertainty and unease, with the suggestion that Stewie's evil was unkillable, because it was fundamental to who he was.